Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tech Talk on moderating-based commissioning. My name is Sherry Adams, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Please note that throughout the Tech Talk, all phone lines will be muted. This will minimize any background noise or feedback that could distract from the presentation. When you first joined, a control panel appeared on the right side of your desktop. On the left side of this control panel is a small tab with an arrow icon at the top. Pressing this icon allows you to minimize and maximize the control panel. When maximized, you can use the control panel to submit questions. We'll be gathering your questions throughout, and we'll leave a little time at the end for Q&A. If your presentation is related to a particular slide, please include the number of the slide in your question. A PDF of the slides from this presentation will be sent electronically to all those who have registered. We will also be recording this Tech Talk, and it will be available on our website under the resource section. Today's presenter is Philip Wright. Philip has 15 years of experience commissioning a variety of building types, including public safety, K-12, higher education, recreation centers and auditoriums, commercial office buildings, and multifamily. The early integration of trend reviews as standard practice in Philip's commissioning procedures provided him the opportunity to assess the validity of MPCX technologies and their potential to improve building performance. Philip is also a board member of the National Capital Chapter of the BCA. So welcome, Philip.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you, Sherry, for that introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining me this morning in the Pacific to talk about monitoring-based commissioning. So I've got about 18 slides or so to get through. So we will hammer ahead, and I will just tell you a little bit about why I'm so interested in this. And as Sherry mentioned, I've been doing trend reviews for a long time, since the very beginning of my commissioning career. It was something that my boss had instituted as standard practice, and we did it both in the start at the substantial completion point and then at during the opposite season. So I was used to dragging through hundreds and hundreds of sheets of paper, looking for discrepancies and getting familiar with the sequences and cross-checking everything. And so when I saw the development of monitoring-based commissioning come along, I thought, this is fantastic. This is going to be something that's going to automate this trend view for me. We'll be able to actually take advantage of being able to do it continuously. It's brilliant. So I've been tracking this for a while, and we've had the opportunity to use it on a couple of projects. And so I've got a little bit of a feeling this is something we're going to see on a more frequent basis. And hopefully today get you energized to go out there and maybe push for it on new projects. So this is going to be our agenda for today. We'll go over definition. We'll talk a little bit why we want to do monitoring-based commissioning. And I'll go back in time and we'll talk about how monitoring-based commissioning was developed, especially the energy management and information systems and the software. And then we'll go into how to implement the commissioning process and use this software, and go over some of the barriers that you may have in projects. And then kind of jumping back to the beginning, when you first sit down with an owner at the beginning of a project and explain to them, what this monitoring-based commissioning is, just go over a couple of the questions that I always get and give you some potential answers to that. And then try and get you onto the path of doing some projects with some monitoring-based commissioning if you haven't already done so. The monitoring-based commissioning is actually part of the ongoing commissioning process. And there's a fantastic best practice document, obviously, on the BCA website. Put the link up here, so if you get the slides afterwards, you can go straight to it. And so if you read this definition, it's the means and process of investigation, evaluation, monitoring, and implementation of improvement measures. And we'll go to the next slide. And so essentially, monitoring-based commissioning is one part of that. So we're going to be part of the monitoring-based commissioning process, utilizing software to continuously analyze the building system data with the intent of improving or maintaining building performance and minimizing operational costs. As you can see, the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory has another definition. I think one thing to point out here is that you can have your building optimized, you can spend years doing it, and then at that point you kind of get to the stage where there's not a lot more you can do. And so you're trying to just maintain that building performance. I mean, you can have system degradation, etc. And so the monitoring-based process will help you actually maintain that, rather than it always being something to continuously improve. I think we have to be realistic. At some point, we will just be maintaining performance as best we can. Another definition to make note of is this EMIS, which I kind of glossed over a minute ago, saying this is the energy management and information systems. Now, these are the tools that you're going to use as part of your monitoring-based commissioning process. That's the software, your DDC system, etc. Like almost every green technology that we hear about, everything's about save energy, improve comfort, reduce maintenance costs, reduce replacement costs. Well, that's the promise of monitoring-based commissioning as well. And there's also the promise that it is a minimum cost to the owner, quick return on investment. Note that it is a complementary technology to what you are already putting into a building. I've got this picture of one of my site visits where I got really muddy going out to, observe geothermal well fields going in. Well, you have to put in all those systems to start with to make your building energy efficient. But then on top of your control system and all of this, you can then put your monitoring-based commissioning process. You can start implementing that and using software to really take advantage of everything that you've got installed. So you can sit back in the office, stay nice and dry, not get muddy, and do this process. And also note that long-term owners, and that's something I want to emphasize here, is when you're talking about monitoring-based commissioning, it's going to be over the long term. So you need somebody who's invested in their building over the long term. You may find that some of your clients may not be applicable to, especially developers who are going to be turning around their building quickly to somebody else. But if you have institutional owners, they really do understand that there is, a high cost to a poorly operated and maintained building. So they're likely to jump on board. So another, continuing along with the saving energy, we're always talking about persistent and optimal energy efficiency through the monitoring-based commissioning process. And then this graph here is really a amalgam of various charts and numbers that have been published by numerous different entities, government entities, private entities on their monitoring-based commissioning. And as you can see, after you've started your building, let's say this is new construction, and you've bench lined your energy use, over time, this blue line gradually rises up over the years, and that's due to your system degradation. And we all know, humidity sensors need to be calibrated within 2 to 3 years latest. Make sure your economizer modes are still working properly. You've got to make sure those actuators and dampers aren't stuck. And so if you aren't doing that, you aren't really maintaining your building properly, you are going to have an increase in energy use over time. If you're lucky enough and the owner gives you a call and you get to go back to that building, you can recommission it and bring everything back down to your bench line. Make sure all those sensors have been calibrated, repair anything that has failed, etc. Now, the advantage of the monitoring-based commissioning is that we can actually improve beyond baseline our performance. So we can actually fine-tune the building to really meet what the owners and the occupants need. So let's say, for example, you initially putting in schedules of 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. And you realize they would put in over the weekends as well, and now you know that the occupants aren't there for that kind of time. You can start pulling back on that. You can start modifying the schedule and the set points too. So you can fine-tune your DP set points, your static pressure set points, your temperature and humidity set points to really meet the owners and the occupants' needs. And as you do that, you're also being aware that sensors are going out of calibration. You're getting in ahead of the game, calibrating them, replacing equipment, and so you can start driving that energy use down. And so the numbers you typically will see are at least 5%, up to 10%, sort of is more common. And then if you're lucky and you have systems that can really be optimized in a building that is kind of not really set up correctly to start with, you can drive those energy that energy use down, down to EMIS really offers much deeper analytics of building operations than we've ever had before with all this data. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about energy tracking. The anomaly detection is, if you have equipment suddenly using more energy than was being tracked before under the same outside air conditions, then that would be flagged, and you can immediately jump on that and correct the issue, and so you don't have a long-term impact of something operating incorrectly hitting your bottom line, on your utility bill. The fault detection and diagnostics plays into that. Peak demand is a big thing. If we're not really tracking where energy is being used, how are we going to write a proper demand response program? If we can track, through the EMIS software where all the energy is being used, we can be really intelligent and write a sequence for demand control and really reduce our need to hit that peak and get hit with those additional energy charges. Equipment degradation, another thing. If we have two chillers and one is actually operating more efficiently, the EMIS software can actually detect that. So why wouldn't we make the more efficient chiller the lead? So there's a long list here, and we could go into a lot of detail on each one of these. I know we haven't got a huge amount of time to do that, but I would maybe pick up on another one down here, the rewriting sequences to optimize operations. It's not often that you have that opportunity to do that, but if you have data that supports making a change to sequences, and then you can actually check whether those sequences actually did improve operations, then why wouldn't you do that? So that's another way of improving the building operations. And you'll often see when you look at various companies and their software, some really nice metrics that they have for the health and the comfort scores. They have a nice dashboard that can help owners identify which of their buildings, if they have a portfolio, which of their buildings are more efficient than the others, which may be getting less efficient over time, which are the most comfortable ones. It just gives everybody a very quick overview and sort of combines all the information from the items above to provide that information. And I'm sure there's a lot of other different analytics that can be done that I haven't touched upon here. So going back in time, like I mentioned, we wanted to review how we got to the place where we are with our monitoring-based commissioning process and the software. Obviously, it is all dependent on being able to use the DDC systems, right? So ever since we had that introduction of DDC into HVAC, we've been able to pull data from it. And it's got more sophisticated over time. It was about 15 years ago, I was still being told, we can't do this at 5-minute intervals because there's just too much data being transferred over the network. And there's not enough space to save this. We can maybe save, 2 days worth of data for you in this building. And it's going to be first in, first out. That started to change, as technology improved, network speeds, it's got a lot faster. We don't have any issues now. I've got a new building recently, and I actually wrote on the control shop drawings, as part of our monitoring-based commissioning process, we're going to be tracking X number of points at these intervals. Please confirm that we're not going to have any issues through the network or saving this data. It's a non-issue at this point. So note that we're also now integrating our HVAC system controls into the electrical systems, in particular the lighting controls. We also pick up sort of meters on the electrical panels if they're installed that way. Plumbing systems, maybe there's not so much information to be gathered from that, but we are picking up temperatures and status points on the water heaters and on the pumps. We're obviously picking up the main utility meters, and if we're lucky, we can get point of use meters throughout the building. So depending on your codes, the ITCC is now requiring the sub-metering of all the different systems, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. But the traditional trend review was really just a snapshot of operations. Right? And as I mentioned before, that's the way I learned it. We did it at substantial completion, and then again in the opposite season, and we just did it for a 24-hour period at hourly intervals. So not a lot of data, but enough to make us get a good comfort feeling before we went into the building to do performance verification. and be able to identify major issues that need to be resolved before we step foot in the building, so we wouldn't be messing around with fundamentals of the operations. You obviously had to have a very good knowledge of all the sequences, and you had to have the discipline to sit down and review hundreds and hundreds of sheets of paper, and then write a detailed report documenting all the issues and making sure that they were going to get resolved. This is a trend review from 2007. It's just a fan-powered VAV box. And fortunately, this was a small building, fire station. There are probably only like 25 VAV boxes in there. So this was probably a quick review, but immediately the eye can spot that we have CFM values going over our max, which we've noted up here on the top right as 530 max CFM and 135 minimum was the design. And so if we see box flow CFM down above 530, something's gone wrong, and we look at the damper position. Okay, that's 51% and it's stuck there. We have a problem. We have a heating output of the valve that's open to 100%, but we're not seeing the supply temperature going up. So this is the kind of stuff that you can spot visually and make notes for. But when I was sitting there doing this, I'm thinking to myself, why can't we do this automatically? There's got to be a way to do this. So that's why I was very excited when I saw that software companies are starting to do this, and even the control vendors started doing this. So there was a step up from the data that I just showed you to actually doing visual graphics of the trend data, and that really allowed you to visually see a lot quicker issues with the operations of equipment. But again, let's just remember, this is just a snapshot. You're sitting in front of the computer, you're witnessing this maybe in real time, or it's being recorded for you and sent over to you, and you're not doing this on a continuous basis. Great for troubleshooting in the field, especially when you can ask the controls guy to get it down to 1 to 5 second intervals, and you want to see how a compressor's cycling on and off and how that's impacting the temperature and humidity discharge on the rooftop unit, which was the case here. We're getting better metering. We talked about smart meters, local meters, and we'll also talk about in a minute virtual meters. So we have a much better understanding of where energy is being used. And then, just as part of the history, we had companies coming in from outside the traditional building automation system, and they identified opportunities in green buildings. So a lot of people from outside are coming in with new ideas, often springboarding off the Internet of Things and their skills at crunching huge data sets, which we know is being done in many other industries. And so they've injected this creativity into our industry, and it's something we really should take advantage of. They've come up with new ways of displaying information to us and looking at things. So, you and I would probably look at some VFDs as on the wall. It's like, okay, are those controlling those pumps to the right DP set point? Are they controlling that fan to the right static pressure set point? Whereas one of these guys comes in and starts looking at saying, what kind of information can I pull off that and analyze from it? So they're thinking sort of along a different track than we typically do. And that's fantastic. It really just brings in these new perspectives. And so when you get the tools developed, this is a snapshot from DataQuip. This is an East Coast company near DC that we're using in one of our projects. They're doing virtual power monitoring. So even though the building didn't have VFDs and point of use meters all over the place, they were able to take nameplate data of equipment and actually calculate the kW usage and then start plotting that. And so we were able to use this information to determine where most energy was being used and see if there were opportunities to then optimize energy efficiency or reduce scheduling, or see whether we could maybe optimize set points on condenser water loops, etc., to reduce energy use. And obviously LEED. We have version 4 now, which introduced enhanced commissioning credit option 1 part 2, gets you just 1 point. Unfortunately, it's not more than that. but it is now exposing everybody to monitoring-based commissioning, specifically the owners and facility personnel and the architects and engineers who may not be aware of it. When you sit down and have a meeting, kick off a project and going over the lead scorecard, you can now, tell them about monitoring-based commissioning and the advantages it may have for their particular project. I know it's rather trite to say, where lead leads are typically followed, but I was looking back at version 2009 and just thinking to myself, how many things in there did we not think was going to be standard practice, and they are now. So if we look at version 4 and 4 years down the line, are we going to be thinking, but monitoring-based commissioning? Now that's just something we do standard. So I suspect it will be. I'm going to go over how we implement and utilize monitoring-based commissioning process and the software. It is going to be kind of biased more towards the application, to new construction, but don't let that stop you from trying to apply this to existing buildings. If you have an existing building with a new DDC, a recent DDC system that has the points being trended that you need, has a network and a server that you can utilize, and it shouldn't be difficult to implement monitoring-based commissioning in an existing building. So I didn't want to make anybody think this was only for new buildings. Be creative. You can use it on pretty much any recent building out there. This diagram is from the BCA ongoing commissioning best practices document. So there is a planning phase, implementation phase, preparation, execution, and your sustaining phase. So that is specific to the ongoing, but the monitoring-based commissioning is basically the same. So as you go through your planning phase, you really want to define your goals. If you're sitting down in the meeting, kicking off this project, and you find that there's a really strong energy management department for this owner, then you're probably going to be defining the goal as we're going to try and reduce energy use. On the other hand, if you have a facilities personnel there that is really concentrated on, I don't want to have failures in my building. Comfort is of primary importance to me. So then potentially the fault detection and the diagnostics become your goal, with energy maybe being a second priority. It's really important to define that from the get-go so you can deliver what the end user really wants at the end of the day. There's no point providing a software system that isn't going to do what they want because they're not going to use it. Establish all the roles and plan out for the long term, and that's critical. You keep emphasizing that monitoring-based commissioning is not just going to be done for a year after substantial completion. You really want this to be going on 5 years and onwards. Then there's the implementation phase. There's a lot of bullet points here. I'm not sure we need to go through every single one of them, but obviously it's very important to get all of the information into the construction documents, and that will be your responsibility as commissioning provider to do that. Not just your part of it, which is the monitoring-based commissioning process, but also to make sure that the requirements for all the software get put into the construction documents. Now that may require you to sit down with the engineer and go through his 2300900 specs and figure out how he's going to integrate that, and also define what kind of outputs you want from the software. Another important thing is to make sure you're putting in enough training and demonstration. I'll hit up on that in a minute, actually, that's important. And then maybe clarify whether you're aiming for a cloud-based software or if it's going to be locally installed, and how is it going to be integrated between the VAS and the EMIS software. All critical items here that need to be done in the implementation phase, and well worth taking the time to get that right up front and making sure everybody is aware once the project goes out for bid that there are all these extra requirements, and that you kick off correctly with all of that in your construction documents. So you've got your preparation phase. So this is going to be during construction. You're going to really need to help the software teams work together. Now, I haven't really talked too much about the different companies out there doing this, but you may find that you can use a control vendor's additional software add to do the work. When you do that, you will just have one team to work with. If you are working with two teams, you're going to need to get them to have that final handshake so they understand what each person's responsibilities are. Make sure you have the IT team on the project as well, and that they're following progress and understand their role. It's going to be their system as a gateway to get information out of the building. And one thing we really learned the hard way was to make sure there is a hard stop to beginning the use of the software. If you don't set a specific date, it's just going to slide and slide and slide. So in your commissioning meetings, you're getting buy-in and getting everybody to shake hands. You then set a date and you make sure that they hit that date. And you can get the monitoring-based commissioning going straight away instead of sitting around for 6 months as a fussing around, not providing you the information you need. So then you get into the execution phase. So this is going to be around about the central completion. You're going to want to ensure the training is adequate for the facilities personnel. I actually want to talk a little bit about that because I think this is really critical. I think we all understand when we're presented a new kind of software that we get familiar with it pretty quickly, but we don't always learn everything in it. So this is going to be the same with the facilities guys. They can have some training at the beginning and they'll get really good at it. But then you need to provide them some additional training on top of that, maybe a couple of months out, okay? So they can then ask their questions on exactly what they were doing that they still had questions about, and then other potential uses of the software that they hadn't really used yet, and then dive deeper into it. And then come back 6 months after and do the same thing again. And then by the end of the year, after 4 or 5 different training sessions, they're going to be really fluent in how to use that software. And it's really going to make a huge difference. So build that into your construction documents that they get that kind of training. Then your job as the commissioning provider is to start monitoring the process, track the output reports, and assist with the assessment analysis, and help provide solutions. There are some turnkey operations out there where the software manufacturer will actually do all that for you. But really, I think that the commissioning provider needs to be the gateway keeper and the filterer of that information to the owner and to the facilities guys, and help them understand what's going on. So you play a really important part in that. And understand that solving problems, getting the resolution to various issues that are flagged may be a warranty issue in that first year, but you may also need to use existing work order process or come up with a new process that's more efficient. And then every time anything is fixed, obviously you want to verify the solutions and the optimization of it. The sustaining phase, make sure you continue monitoring the building. It is monitoring-based commissioning, obviously. We're doing this long-term. And track the successes and highlight them. If you can really point out why this is being so successful, you're going to have a happy client, and you're going to have, and they may even invite you to work on, some of their other buildings and bring this process into other facilities. And keep working on the best way to resolve issues. So whether that is you still filtering information and providing solutions to it as part of your contract, or whether there can be other ways of working around the work order process, which is typically used only to solve things that have really failed. Because a lot of these items that you're going to find are going to be to optimize. So they usually get put down at the bottom of priority. If you've got a lot of alarms on your energy management system, why would you go and start looking at flags on your monitoring-based commissioning software? Right? Your priority is going to be the alarms, right? But you don't want that to always be the case. You need to be able to get the person to have enough bandwidth that they can understand these flags and realize that they are critical to the total holistic operations of the building. Yeah, so those are some of the barriers. I kind of hit up some of those, obviously. I mean, data overload, right? Be that filter. There are going to be many, many flagged items. And maybe the first time you go through it, you're going to prioritize those that are the low-hanging fruit. The second time you go through it, you can then start picking up some of the more complex issues. Keep emphasizing that everything has to stay in the automated mode. Make sure the building operators aren't overriding anything. And if they are, give them your phone number so they can call you if they start feeling like they haven't put too many things in override. So you can go in and help them and find out what the root cause of that problem is. Anything that's put in an override is just going to be a disadvantage to you. And we talked a little bit about identifying a champion. If you have somebody on the other side of the table, on the building side, that is really championing the monitoring-based commissioning process, then you're going to have a lot of success. So build up somebody on the other side that can really help you out and work as a team. And finding those root causes, obviously your commissioning experience is invaluable. It may be harder for the building engineers to figure out what's going on. They may be new to the building, but you have spent hours and hours, going through the building as part of your pre-functional, and then witnessing startups, and then being there for the performance verifications. So you are probably in the best position to know what could potentially be going wrong. And then obviously, kind of related to some of the items above, the failures of the facility personnel to take on the EMIS, so you need to stay involved. Make sure they're getting that additional training, and see if you can get somebody on their side to really start considering energy management if they haven't already got somebody, because that person you'll find is normally the go-getter on a project. And if you can make friends with them and they're on board with this, then they can usually push things in the background and make sure that everything is staying on track. So we've got some common owner questions. These are the ones I normally get. I'm British, as you can probably hear from my accent. I don't use acronyms too much, but when I came to the US, they were everywhere. But now I get asked, not yet another acronym, please. Explain to me what you're talking about. So really be careful when you're talking with anybody, even when you're kicking off a project and you really want monitoring-based commissioning on it, and you're trying to push for it, whether it's a lead project or this is the solution to solve a lot of problems in a building. Don't overwhelm people with technical jargon. Explain the basics and everybody will understand you. Going over the reasons for it, whether it's fault detection and diagnostics or energy optimization. Try to reduce the use of acronyms and keep it simple. I think it's a pretty persuasive argument, and I don't think you don't need to overwhelm anybody with technical jargon. The next question you'll always get is, what's going to be the cost of this? Now, if you are able to have an influence over the construction documents and you get buy-in from the AE team and the owner to be able to assign that cost at the beginning, you could potentially put the initial purchase of the software into the construction documents, so the GC buys it essentially at the beginning. And then the subscription cost for the first year should probably be under the GC as well. And then after that, you need to figure out who's going to do that. Now, you could potentially actually subcontract the subscription under you as a commissioning provider. That's one way of doing it. Or more traditionally, the owner will take on that responsibility of paying for it. There's some costs here from the US Department of Energy, Better Buildings. They had quite a few projects and they ran these numbers. You can see it's a pretty low number. I think it probably runs a little bit higher on the projects I've done, closer to maybe 10 cents in the first year to maybe 15 cents, because you want to take into account that initial cost of purchasing the software. But then it does drop, because the subscription costs aren't that much. And really what it comes down to is the cost of who is monitoring it. And if it's going to be you, then yes, there is a cost. Everyone's going to have to pay for you to do the work. But if it is facilities personnel with you in the background, maybe assisting, then it's going to be a lot lower because he's already got that cost sunk into his personnel. And then we always get the question, oh no, we have to spend more money to save money. I think at this point, you really need to explain that the building's now so sophisticated and you're putting in such expensive control systems that you need to take advantage of them. And the cost ratio of the EMIS software compared to the DEC system that's being installed is small. And I would also say you want to review their energy baseline use, if it's already been modeled through LEED or not, and then evaluate how realistic the savings are going to be on that installed building. My gut feeling is the buildings we've done, which have been, chiller, boiler-based, VAV air handling units, have a lot more that could be optimized than, say, your all-electric VRF system and DOAS units, which probably going to be harder to find the same kind of savings in there. So you would have to adjust your evaluation of how much you're going to save over time. So we want to take the opportunity to ensure that all the hard work that you've done commissioning a building is maintained. And it always seems a shame to me when I walk away from a building that probably within 6 months to a year, things aren't going to be operating as we left them. I've had buildings which we've had to go back like 7 years down the line, and just because the owner said nothing's working now, and that's just such a shame as we walk in and discover almost every actuator who sees none of the valves are working right, everything's overridden, and the energy use is just skyrocketed, and the equipment is failing. So we really want to avoid that. We want to make sure these buildings that we spend so much time on actually continue to operate efficiently in the long run. So just keep explaining to the owner system degradation, keep clarifying the differences between reactive facility operation and proactive. We're creating a proactive operation here when you've got that monitoring-based system going. You can be ahead of the game all the time, and owners want to be. They're sophisticated. They understand this. Discuss the concept of real-time monitoring versus responding to alarms. We talked about that a minute ago, how you have your facilities guys jumping on the alarms, but not really taking any particular sophisticated approach to preventative maintenance and monitoring comfort and energy. And then obviously there's that continued relationship between you as a commissioning provider and the owner, and that's really invaluable. It gives you further opportunities to help the owner on new projects or existing projects, and also to provide other services as needed, and to help keep our buildings as efficient as possible. Every building that comes online, we are trying to reduce carbon footprint overall, so let's keep it that way. So I think we kind of run at 2:38. Hopefully there's a little bit of time for questions, Sherry.
You have some questions that have come in. Thank you, Philip. Let's see. We will start with, is monitoring-based commissioning only for HVAC, or could it be for lights, fire alarm, troubles, etc.?
I've really concentrated on the HVAC, but you're correct. You could, if you can get the software set up for you, monitor the fire alarm systems. I know I'm doing an adult detention center, and we have the whole smoke control system integrated with the fire alarm system, and there would be a really big advantage to being able to monitor everything all together. So that would just require some time writing exactly what your goals are, and maybe sitting down with one of the software developers to figure out how you could write the right algorithms and things that you would need to be able to monitor it as you need it. But I don't see there being anything to prevent you from doing that. No.
Okay. And then can you provide comment or draw a comparison to LEED version 4 monitoring-based commissioning in terms of meeting the requirements of each number of points monitored, intervals, equipment size?
So version 4 really doesn't provide you a lot of information about about the intervals and which points to do. So that's going to come down to you as commissioning provider and maybe sitting down with the engineer to figure out what is useful. I think, from the standard equipment, VAV, you can probably figure out, which are the important points there. And then when you get into the air handling unit and, more central plant equipment, you do need to start thinking a little bit more about sort of extraneous points that could be useful for diagnosis. So making sure you pick up all the sensors throughout the system so you can figure out if something's gone wrong by comparing one temperature to another, or a status of something to status of something else. So that making that list will take time. Obviously sitting there going over the control drawings is going to help you develop that. And then figuring out the intervals. I think you will probably find that 15-minute intervals are sort of standard practice now as being set up by the controls contractors. And that seems to be sufficient to track most things within the HVAC scope, because equipment does take a while to respond to commands and get to set point, etc. So more than 15 minutes is really getting down into the weeds when you're troubleshooting. But for general diagnostics and monitoring-based commissioning, 15 minutes is probably sufficient.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit earlier about cost. Sorry, another question just popped in and I keep a tracker. What would you estimate the cost for the service on a typical K-6 elementary school project to meet LEED version 4 monitoring-based commissioning? Could you?
The couple of companies that we've been working with have very different approaches. So there's what I'm saying is like the cheap version, in that the software is fairly cheap and fairly standardized. So when you've got a lot of terminal equipment and they have some common algorithms that they can just apply across the board, and there isn't a lot of custom programming required, we're finding that the cost of the software up front for a building of that size is probably $20,000 or so. And then that company doesn't do any of the filtering. You'll basically be the person monitoring it and sitting there writing the reports and sending those out. So you then have to build in that cost on top, to tell the owner what the true cost is going to be. So it's going to be the software cost and then your services on top. And then we've been working with a turnkey company that actually will be very custom, and we were working with them on figuring out exactly what those sequences should be and the diagnostics should be on each piece of equipment. And so that obviously costs a lot more upfront, and they actually have somebody monitoring it for you. So we were still going to be active to filter on that and work in partnership with their team to develop those reports, and that is at least twice the cost upfront for that first year, if not a little bit more for that service. So you would have to weigh up exactly how sophisticated the system is you want. On a K through 12, probably doesn't need to be super custom, and you can probably go with something a little bit more generic and save money up front, and then you be the gatekeeper and just make sure you include your fee in to perform that work.
Great, thank you. And then referring to slide 18, how much benefit is there for having standardized point naming conventions?
Point name conventions. So we have several different clients that are actually standardizing across the board, across their buildings, point names. And so the controls vendors are being forced to do that anyway. I think a lot of control vendors are already kind of standardized within themselves, those point names. But really the critical part is, can you understand what those point names mean? And they really should be translated for you into English words, for the points. I think I would go back to this traditional trend review. We actually made sure that the controls contractor didn't put the point name up here on the top of the table. We actually told them that we didn't want English language titles on each column, so we know exactly what that point is. And so that's really how it should be displayed at the end of the day on the software outputs that you see. You shouldn't be seeing, a set of numbers and letters that you have to decipher, which you can probably do as a commissioning provider because you're so familiar with it, but nobody else can. So anything that's displayed on screen should have a proper English language name to it. So I think that may mean that standardization of point names isn't as important at the end of the day, because you really are looking for these outputs and being able to understand that.
Okay. And then have you ever provided monitoring software in your commissioning contract?
Yeah, by mistake. So lesson learned. Make sure that you actually define that upfront, who's paying for it. So that's why on our subsequent project, we sat down with the engineer and made sure it was written not just in our spec that it was going to be paid for, but also in their specs and in the Division 1 specs, because we didn't want to fall on our sword again the second time. The first time, we essentially had a fee for our services and realized that every single penny of that was going to be taken up by the software because nobody was responsible for purchasing it. So yeah, take that lesson and learn it from me.
Okay, good. And we still have a few more. I'll try to get to it before we run out of time here. How successful are current energy models when compared to MBCX, and what specific advantages or disadvantages does the energy model provide?
Well, that's interesting because I've recently done an analysis for a local county that had decided to go LEED Silver 10 years ago, and they wanted to see if that LEED Silver had paid off. So we actually did look at every single energy model, and we reviewed their energy data, and we had some going back 7 or 8 years. So we were able to compare the energy usage to that model, and we wanted to see how they diverged. And then we compared to what the baseline was going to be, energy use, and then figured out what that difference was. And interestingly enough, we essentially proved that going with LEED Silver and doing that energy modeling and proving that you were going to save 15 to 20% on those buildings, which was kind of the average across the board of their portfolio, did pay back. In fact, it had a payback period of like 3.5 to 4 years. And that allowed the county to make the decision to go ahead and actually continue using LEED, because it was being fought against by their board because they thought it was costing them money, and they were able to prove that no, LEED was saving them money and that they should continue using LEED version 4. And in fact, we did the analysis, figured out that if the energy model paid off that well, we would actually aim for gold. And the payback period for that was 7 years, even with additional credits that they had to do. The county decided to take that because they own these buildings for 50 years or more, so it paid back. So the energy modeling seemed to prove itself and pay back.
Great. And then I think we have time for one more question. And if there's a few questions that didn't get answered, we'll make sure to get those over to Philip and have them answered for you. But Philip, in your experience, do owners allow for remote access to the moderating software?
That's a good question. I didn't touch on that, but yes, the security can be a problem. So that's something you need to sit down with the owner at the very beginning and work that out. We had to do a couple of workarounds, and often the software companies, if you have 2 or 3 that you're going to list, if you have them provide the information up front of how they're going to do it, and you can pass that over and have those conversations with the IT security department up front, then you probably get buy-in, because they have worked out how to do this, the various software companies, and they understand that this is going to be probably the first question actually that the IT department is going to ask about it. So we haven't had any issues doing it. We've had the buy-in and been able to get it approved and get through all the firewalls, etc. But it's a special case, so you do need to work through it.
Great, thank you. And Philip, we really appreciate your time and expertise today. And Just a few quick announcements to everyone out there. The BCA annual meeting is scheduled for this Wednesday, October 21st at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So if you haven't already registered, you can still do so by going to the homepage of our new website. And then also our fall webinar series is still going on with our next webinar scheduled for November 9th. And it is on commissioning fire and life safety systems essentials. On behalf of the BCA, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in today's Tech Talk and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.